My name's Steve Connor. I am the director of Central Hampshire Veteran Services. And Veteran Services in Massachusetts is a unique program. Every city and town in the state of Massachusetts has to have veteran service officer, veterans agent, whatever you want to call it. And it's required by state law. And that law was first passed and signed in 1861. So we've been around a very long time. Our job is to meet the needs of the veterans and their families when they've come back after service. If they've been serving in any of the armed forces and they were on active duty, they are considered a veteran in Massachusetts, so we serve them. What do we do for them? We're responsible for making sure they have shelter, that they have health care, that they have income. So that means if we have a veteran who's newly a veteran who comes home and has yet to find work and is in transition, our job is to make sure they get all the essential stuff done. And then, if wanted and needed, we help them try to find employment or training. We are kind of a conduit to get them the other benefits as well, which come from the VA, the federal government, both the health and the benefits administration, that if you've been injured or exposed to contaminants or toxins while you served, there is monies and programs to assist you because of that. And we help veterans apply for that, or the surviving spouse of a veteran, or a family of a veteran. So I am a veteran of the U.S. Navy. I served in the late 70s after the war. When I came home, I pretty much didn't, I almost felt like a Vietnam veteran. I didn't tell anybody that I served. Other than my family and all their service, fathers, uncles, brothers, we were all in the service. They knew it, but for the most part, I didn't do anything about being a veteran. Didn't really feel like I was a veteran. Part of it is I didn't serve very long. I didn't serve during wartime. When I started, I didn't think it was going to be a very difficult job. As a matter of fact, I thought it'd be kind of a cushy job. And once my kids got out of school, I'd go on and move on to do something else more challenging. This has been one of the most challenging jobs I can imagine having, because of the dimension of the need. There was many challenges for those people coming home and those families that were left behind, and then they came home, or the whole family gets picked up and moved. There's so many challenges. If people really thought about it, they would go, what would my family have done? What would we have gone through if we had to go from base to, the whole family lived over here, now they're over on the other coast. There's not the infrastructure to support them that I thought would have existed. But we're getting there. And doing that with the healthcare system is going to get us even further. For the years that I've been doing this, I've had people who say they're not a veteran, and I'll check with them about it. And there's one in particular I remember so vividly, I always tell it, but he was a Korean War veteran. And I went to assist him, and I said, well, we can file for a disability for you. And he goes, well, I'm not a veteran. And I said, well, you gave me your DD-214. I'm looking right at it. Why aren't you a veteran? Yeah, you served in Korea, right, sir? And he's like, yep. I said, it says you were infantry? Yep. Did you carry a rifle? Oh, yeah. Oh, I was right on the line. We were shooting. I said, why wouldn't you be considered a veteran then? He says, I wasn't shot. So the idea of who's a veteran, who's not a veteran, is all over the place. And I just had a veteran, he was 93. He never used anything from the veteran thing because during war, he was stationed in the States. He didn't go to where the war was. So to him, he would feel really guilty asking for anything but everybody is essential in the military. You need to do your job, and it helps others in their job. Most people don't serve on the line. There's all the things that help that person serve on the line. So I got caught in the same thing of, well, I'm not really a veteran and so on and so forth. But now, and we did this back in 2012, I think, they started to have veteran treatment courts to find out who's a veteran, because there's no, as most of us know, there's no easy way to find out who's a veteran, who isn't, and where they are, and how many. So when the courts were saying, we're going to give some differential treatment to returning veterans, it was like, well, how are you going to know who's a veteran and who's not? They said, well, we'll put it on the probation form, because if you get in trouble, everybody's got to go to the probation office. And if you need legal help and you can't afford it, all that process, we wanted to ask the question to find out veteran status. And we realized you can't ask if somebody is a veteran. So we reworded it, and it took the legislature to pass this. On the form, it says, do you have a history of military service? That got a much more accurate count, and people understood that question. Some of them still didn't want to say it because they got involved with the courts, and they, they're veterans. They don't want to tarnish the name or whatever. But a lot of people did, and now the treatment courts work great. One of the best ones is right here in Holyoke. But that's the process to identify veterans. You got to ask them if they have military history. Just asking if they're a veteran is so vague and can be so varied. Nobody asked me initially or even after if I had served in the military, or if I even had a family member who served. Once they found out, they might have, then followed up, but they didn't make the ask. Okay. When I first got back, I never went to the VA. It wasn't until I got diagnosed by a civilian that I was suffering with PTSD. And I argued with her greatly, because I said, no, I don't have that, because I never served in combat. So it wasn't, I work with men and women who have PTSD. I know what it looks like. I don't have that. And she then took out the book and started listing symptoms. Now, she had been my therapist for on and off for a few years. And my second marriage had ended. And so I went to her about that. And very slowly, after my second session back with her, she started reading from the book. And I said, well, yeah, I have that, but it's not due to that. She goes, that's what it all is due to. You're living a memory over and over and over again that happened at that time. It was almost 31 years. Yeah, because they don't feel like they're going to understand. The memory that I had was I was sexually assaulted. It's called MST, military sexual trauma. And that happened to me when I was overseas. I never told anybody about it. I told nobody about it. Finally, I ended up telling her, because she was digging at different things. And she asked me, did anything happen when you were younger? And that's when I finally, it all came out. She then referred me to a civilian doctor, my regular doctor that I had, to get some medication, because she couldn't prescribe it. So I went to him, and he was asking me why I needed this medication. And I said, well, I've been diagnosed with this. I don't know, She says that's what I've got. Some of it makes sense. I don't know. And he said, oh, okay. And then he wanted to know what was my trauma. So I then had to tell him. He then suggested that I go to get therapy at a vet center. And I was like, I'm not a combat veteran. He informed me that he thought that they worked with folks that are victims of MST, and he turned out to be right. I've not seen another doctor who knows that. I don't know why he knew that, but he knew it, and I went. Going there kind of changed the type of therapy I was getting. They were treating me as a veteran, where at my other circumstance, I wasn't being treated as a veteran. She didn't deal with veterans per se. They need to feel free to ask. I mean, working in the veteran world, having parents and uncles that were veterans, they don't like to ask for help. They don't like to share a lot. They don't think they need to go to the doctor as much. All incorrect. Not good for your health to have that attitude, but unfortunately that does exist. But you're going to get help if you ask for it. And if you identify the culture you come from, it will help the healthcare industry serve you better, especially if they see the numbers and they see the progress that can be made. If they identify and that provider goes, oh, okay, you served, I now have a little bit better idea what to expect from you, and I have a better idea what to tell you to expect from me. I think that's always a good thing, always a good thing. I mean, that's why many veterans, when they do enroll into the VA healthcare system, feel at ease about sharing stuff because they're used to dealing with veterans. We just need to get the rest of the civilian population to act the same way. But they're only going to get there when they have the knowledge and the access to information. She knew something was up because she couldn't figure out why I had all those symptoms. And she's like, what do you think about? Why do you tell me you don't sleep and all these things? And so I finally, I just remember it coming out, and I don't even remember what exact question she asked, but it came out and she knew what to do. I did have one doctor early on when I came home, and I think it was through Valley Medical. He was a veteran, so there was immediate kind of comfort there of like he knows, what things, how I might react to something. But most of the other doctors and nurses that nurse practitioners, if they weren't at the VA, and of course I didn't start going to the VA until I was 50 something, by the time I finally was able to enroll and get that care and get that. But most of the other ones didn't really understand what it was like. And I found that a lot of veterans feel that same way, that they don't share some stuff with their doctor and stuff because they're like, well, they're not going to really get it. They're not going to understand that. I always try to tell the veteran, no, you should share it. You should, because they may, just like mine. If I had never told him, he would have never said, oh, you can go to the vet center, which I still kind of find incredible that he knew that. But he did. And so there are doctors who do know it, and there's many that don't, but ask. Me personally, no, because I usually didn't share very much about it. Like I told you, I didn't really consider myself a veteran until I became a veteran service officer and realized all the things. But before that, I didn't really think of it, so I didn't have any expectation, and I didn't really share. I think during times of conflict, war, the whole community is more aware. And I think we saw that when Iraq and Afghanistan were going on and people were coming home. There was a little bit more curiosity amongst the entire community and people wanting to connect and help. I guess the sad part is it's now been many years. A lot of them have come home. It's no longer in anybody's consciousness. So it might be going back to where there isn't that curiosity. But there was for quite a while. And I know that, growing up during the Vietnam War, my mother was a registered nurse. She worked at the hospital right up the road. And, they were very aware of people coming into the ER and stuff could be veterans. And I think there was a curiosity in the early 2000s, and a little bit after that, that was like that. But I think it's faded. But the veterans didn't go anywhere. They're still here. And there's still many of them, and they still need the service. When women will come to events for veterans, many providers of charitable services or nonprofit or whatever will say, "Oh, is your husband a veteran?" And you just see the women roll their eyes and go, "No, I'm the veteran." People still haven't gotten used to that, but it is the highest growing demographic of veterans in this country are female veterans. And many face, even if they're not suffering PTSD from an MST, from a military sexual trauma, they still know what it was like to be a woman in the military. And although when you're working, you're disciplined and you do your job, and everybody does their job, but people don't work 24 hours a day. They work 12 hours a day when you're on active duty or out on assignment. The rest of the time, people are people, and veteran or military people come from the same stock of people that live in this country. So do they have some people who abuse others? Yep. And women face barriers placed by men in the military and sometimes placed by other women in the military. And that when they get out, they hope they don't have to face that on the outside. And so when somebody doesn't recognize that they could be a veteran, that just starts all that doubt all over again. So that's a big thing I've seen the female veterans that I've worked with have to face. But they're a strong breed. So I've had one stays home with the family while the other one is deployed. If they're not both in and only one goes and serves, they come home, they're no longer in control of the family like they were before they left because they haven't been there for a year. And that causes all kinds of challenges both ways. So fathers coming home, they're so used to being, well, I'm the father, I'm supposed to do this, and I make the decisions, and and the wife is like, no, this is the way we've been doing it for a year, please don't mess this up. That's hard. But I've seen it go exactly the same way for a female veteran who comes home. Dad's been the one taking care of the family and the order and how things work, much more than you would think. I mean, more than the traditional role of a father. They're doing both roles, so when the mother comes back, she has to get used to the fact that the kids, if they're upset or hurt or whatever, are running to dad and not her, because they used to always run to her. That change, that's one of the transitions that returning service members, veterans, have to go through after deployment. Is just, my role has been missing for a year, and that really does affect the whole family. There was a bunch happened with kids acting out, and I would hear when I'd go and do a presentation about veteran services and what we could do, if I had a school counselor or teacher, they would say, I have a kid who I just learned, we had to discipline him, and we just learned that, their father just got deployed last month. And turns out that's what they're so upset about, but they didn't tell us. How do we handle that? I mean, there is now lots of research going on. There's a great national group that works with children of the military. It's important stuff. What I find now interesting, and I have to go, my granddaughter lives in Delmar, south of Albany, and last year the school decided that they wanted the students, if they had a veteran in their family, they would come on Veterans Day or around Veterans Day so that the kids can celebrate that. So my granddaughter expects me now every year, and I'm going again this year. It's on my birthday, but I'm going to go to the school, and it allows kids to learn who a veteran is and that you have one in your family, and I'm the one for her. And I think that's a really good thing, because then kids don't have to feel like only their father or only their grandmother or grandfather served, that a lot of people serve, and they just come from the same neighborhoods we all do. And that will help kids not feel isolated, because usually when somebody's off in deployment, the kid doesn't know who to talk to, doesn't think there's anybody else that goes through that. So, and we all know if we feel isolated, it's not healthy. So this kind of thing, I think, will be helpful for kids. But yeah, it is an isolation. All of it is. The other thing I would say is that there are not as many veterans serving today, or even 20 years ago, as they did 50 years ago, because there's no draft. These are people who go and deploy over and over again. Lots of them make it a career. If they don't, they come home, they just get on with their life. But there's not the same numbers that there once were serving, which is a good thing because we want to have peace, but it's a hard thing because it does increase isolation. We do celebrate returning veterans much more now than we did after the Vietnam War and I was growing up. But just because we acknowledge it more doesn't mean they're not feeling the same isolation, because we still haven't figured out how to incorporate them in our community, which is kind of crazy because they came from our community. Are they different? Sure. Life changes all of us. It's just a different one. But that's what I've been pushing for 2 decades, is trying to end the isolation of veterans from the rest of the community. We have a guard base and a reserve base out here in Western Massachusetts, so we see a lot of those folks. We don't have an active duty base in Western Mass, so it is the guard and reservists, but they're also getting much more activated than they ever did before. Right. You know, there was that whole thing, and I explained to people that Vietnam veterans, war veterans, have sometimes a struggle with their counterparts who went into the Guard during the 60s and early 70s. They did it to avoid going to Vietnam, where the others got drafted and were sent. There was a lot of friction. That friction doesn't exist the same level anymore because Guard and reservists all went over. Right. They did their time over there, often in support roles, but we had a unit here that one of their jobs, even though they weren't trained for it, they had to get retrained to be guards at Abu Ghraib. That was not a role that they were expecting, but they all had to serve and do that. So they're much more participating in our military actions than ever before, that I know, unless you go back to the 250 years ago when that's all it was the National Guard. The Minutemen were a National Guard, but now with these, 20th and 21st century wars, the Guard and reservists are being used.